Hey guys, tonight we start in the gentle gray of medieval dawn, where time is not a ticking countdown but a soft unfolding. You trudge quietly through the damp monastery grounds, your footsteps muffled by dew soaked grass, and as the first pale light stretches across the horizon, something subtle yet profound happens. The monks begin their daybreak rituals. It's easy to overlook how much this moment shaped their entire sense of time, not a sudden jolt like our alarms, but a gradual awakening marked by the faintest shifts in light and sound. This story doesn't shout. It hides in the silence before the bells ring, waits in the flicker of candles just before the sun breaches the sky, and reveals something you might not want to remember about how we used to live by nature's gentle cues. You probably won't survive this day without a strong cup of modern coffee, but for these medieval monks, the dawn was a sacred summons that set the rhythm for everything to come. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Oh, and drop your location and local time in the comments. I'm curious who's drifting to sleep and who's just waking up now. Dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself standing at the cusp of daybreak in a stone monastery nestled deep in the medieval countryside. The air is crisp, thick with the scent of moss and smoke from the nocturnal hearths. The world outside is still cloaked in shadows, but inside, the monks are already stirring quiet figures moving in the half-light, each aware that the turning of the day begins with an act far more ritualistic than practical. They don't check a clock. Clocks as we know them won't enter their lives for another few centuries. Instead, their waking is guided by dawn's subtle unveiling, the earliest hint of light, when the horizon blushes faint pink or gray, is their signal. You imagine the sharp contrast with the modern life. No buzzing devices demanding instant attention, just the slow creep of light nudging the body awake. Monks rise to perform the matins, the first of the canonical hours, a long night prayer that sometimes stretches into the pre-dawn hours. Before the bell tolls, the gradual illumination outside cues the shift from rest to activity. This moment is not just about timekeeping. It's a spiritual transition from darkness to light, from silence to chant. You can almost hear the low murmur of prayers blending with birdsong just beginning to pierce the quiet. In this way, their sense of time is woven from the natural world, sun, moon, stars, and seasonal shifts rather than from mechanical devices or strict schedules. Interestingly, historians still argue about how precise these dawn rituals could really be. Without clocks, how did monks know exactly when to begin? Some suggest the use of simple sundials or even water clocks kept inside the monastery, but these were hardly precise by today's standards. More often, it seems, monks relied on a kind of practiced intuition, a lifelong attunement to the slow cues of nature. Imagine the patience and discipline that requires, a stark contrast to our rush hour alarms and calendar notifications. In fact, this natural rhythm meant that their waking time shifted gradually throughout the year, with earlier risings in summer when the sun appeared sooner, and much later awakenings in the dark winter months. You probably didn't realize just how much our modern obsession with exact minutes and seconds has shifted the human experience of time. For medieval monks, time was fluid, elastic, and deeply connected to the cycles of the earth. Their daybreak rituals remind us that before precision was prized, presence was everything. The quietness of those first moments, the soft scraping of wooden sandals on stone floors, the faint clink of metal keys on belts, the distant crowing of a rooster forms a soundscape that we rarely pause to hear today. These monks begin their day with a kind of mindful awareness you might find oddly soothing if you let yourself lean into it. Their world doesn't shout deadlines. It whispers transitions. The rising light doesn't demand immediate action. It invites a gradual unfolding. As you drift into sleep tonight, think about that gentle awakening. Maybe, just maybe, there's something to learn from how these monks greeted the day slowly, reverently, with an ear tuned to nature's quiet signals. It's a stark reminder that time, once, was less about measurement and more about experience. This soft paradox that we measure time to control it, yet we lose touch with it when we do, hangs over their dawn rituals like morning mist. And here's a quirky tidbit to tuck into your mind before you drift off. Some monasteries reportedly used animals like cockerels and dogs as informal alarm clocks. These creatures, sensitive to dawn's first light, would begin their noisy announcements just as the monks were meant to rise. It's not quite the vibrating smartwatch on your wrist, but it got the job done. Plus, no need to charge it. Who knew medieval monks were the original fans of bio-alarm systems? You wander further into the monastery's early hours and notice the smell of wax and incense beginning to fill the stone halls, a sensory marker signaling the start of ritual and order. These are not mere practical routines, but acts designed to sanctify time itself. Time here is more than numbers or hours. It is a sacred substance, a flow to be honored, not conquered. And in that flow, the first light of daybreak serves as a daily reminder of renewal, discipline, and the quiet, relentless passage of life. It's tempting to romanticize this slow, natural approach to time, but remember, living by dawn's light wasn't always peaceful. The monks endured cold, damp stone cells, long hours of night prayer that tested their physical limits, and the ever-present pressure to maintain the strict rhythm of their community. It's not like they woke to birdsong and then lounged around sipping herbal tea. Their time was counted in prayers, work, and the constant pursuit of spiritual perfection. The dawn was a sacred boundary, but also a demanding one. So, as you settle in for the night, consider this your own waking routine. Blasted by alarms and rushing schedules, is a far cry from the gentle stirring by dawn that medieval monks knew. But maybe, in the quiet moments just before sleep, you can glimpse a little of their world, a world where time begins not with urgency, but with a soft awakening, as natural and inevitable as the slow dance of first light. You step deeper into the monastery's daily rhythm, where the concept of time stretches and contracts according to the sun's journey, rather than the ticking of any mechanical clock. The monks divide their day not into the neat 24 hours you're used to, but into hours whose length flexes with the season, a fascinating practice that might seem baffling now, but made perfect sense then. Imagine, if you will, that in summer, daylight hours were longer, so each hour was actually longer, stretching lazily like a warm afternoon. In winter, with fewer daylight hours, those same hours shrank, brief and sharp like a chill snap of cold air. This was the medieval way of counting daylight, dividing the available light into 12 equal parts, no matter how long or short the day was. Nighttime followed the same logic, sliced into 12 parts as well, but those too shifted with the seasons, making an hour in December far shorter than one in June. You're probably thinking how utterly confusing this must have been. Historians still argue how strictly these variable hours were observed, especially in smaller or less disciplined monasteries. It wasn't just a curious quirk, it was the very fabric of their timekeeping. The logic behind this system, often called unequal hours or seasonal hours, was deeply rooted in the monks' need to coordinate their prayers, work, and meals with the natural world. No sundials or clocks measured these variable hours perfectly, so the monks learned to read the sun's position, shadows, and even the ambient light to estimate the passing time. You might picture a monk squinting at a sundial, watching the shadow creep along the carefully marked divisions, translating that silent, moving line into the next task or prayer. The idea of a fixed-length hour, such as your modern 60-minute chunk, simply did not exist for them. It's almost like living in a world where minutes aren't minutes, but moods that ebb and flow with the sun, and yet, somehow, they made it work. The quirky side to this system is how it influenced the very pace of life. Since hours lengthened in summer and shortened in winter, the monks' daily rhythm naturally slowed down or sped up according to the season. In long summer days, there was more time for work, study, or contemplation. In the gloom of winter, the day seemed compressed, forcing a different kind of intensity and even scarcity. Imagine the psychological impact of living with such fluid time, how your perception of a day's fullness would change as the year unwound. Maybe that's why medieval monks developed such a rich internal discipline. They couldn't rely on clocks to keep them honest, so they honed their attentiveness to nature's subtle shifts. It's worth noting that this system was not unique to monks. It was common throughout Europe in the Middle Ages. Yet monks, bound by strict prayer schedules known as the canonical hours, had the greatest incentive to adhere to this flexible timekeeping. Their day was structured around prayer at specific hours like prime, terce, sext, and none, each roughly marking the 3rd, 6th, and 9th hours after dawn. But with daylight hours changing, the actual clock time of these prayers shifted. This meant monks' bell ringing and activities synced more with sun movements than fixed times like 3 p.m. This natural attunement is hard for modern minds fixed on rigid schedules to grasp, but it gave their days a flowing, organic character. Here's a curious detail: some monasteries reportedly used specially designed sundials marked for these variable hours, with lines curved or adjusted to account for the shifting length of daylight. It's a clever workaround, but one historian still debate how widely practical or accurate it was. Some monks might have just relied on simple cues like the position of the sun in the sky or the length of shadows, trusting their experience and communal memory more than any device. In that sense, the medieval approach to time is almost like a shared secret, a collective intuition passed down through generations rather than recorded precisely in numbers. You may chuckle at the thought that their hours were, in essence, mood-dependent. Imagine scheduling a meeting that lasts an hour in summer, but only 45 minutes in winter. No wonder medieval monks weren't rushing to invent wristwatches. Still, this flexible timing served their spiritual purpose well, since their day was segmented by prayers intended to honor God at various sun-marked intervals. Tying time to nature rather than mechanics reinforced their devotional connection. It's as if every moment measured by the sun was itself a prayer, a meditation on the passing of light and life. Historians continue to puzzle over how this system handled practical needs beyond prayer. For example, coordinating work assignments or meals in a monastery or communicating time to the outside world must have been tricky. Some scholars suggest that as mechanical clocks began to appear in the later Middle Ages, the fixed hour system started to replace variable hours in daily use. Yet for many monks in earlier centuries, the sun's arc was their sole timekeeper. You might think of this as living with a flexible schedule rather than a fixed one, a practice that modern flexible workers might secretly envy. In a way, this system echoes some indigenous cultures' perceptions of time, where moments are not rigid but situational, flowing with natural cycles and events. The medieval monks' variable hours remind you that the very concept of time is a human invention, shaped by culture and necessity rather than any universal truth. The sun ruled their lives, dictating when to rise, pray, labor, and rest, a rhythm intimately tied to the earth's eternal dance. You probably wouldn't want to depend on this system if you had a busy appointment calendar or a Zoom meeting, but for a monastic life devoted to contemplation, it worked surprisingly well. This fluid approach to hours encouraged mindfulness and presence, anchoring monks in the natural world's rhythms, rather than the relentless precision of modern timekeeping. There's a gentle poetry in that the day's length, and thus the hours within it, stretch and shrink as the world turns, reminding us all that time is not a tyrant, but a river. A funny little aside, some monks reportedly joked that the variable hours gave them the perfect excuse to extend summer prayers or shorten winter tasks, depending on their mood or energy. While this might be apocryphal, it hints at the human tendency to bend even sacred timekeeping to personal convenience. After all, not all monks were saints in punctuality, and without exact clocks, some discretion was inevitable. Imagine the occasional eye rolls or whispered grumbles when the third-hour prayer came a little late, blamed on the sun's stubborn clouds. You might wonder how this system affected ordinary people outside monasteries. Villagers often looked to the monastery bells to mark the time, so their daily rhythms intertwined with these variable hours. It's a reminder that medieval timekeeping was a community affair, less about individual punctuality and more about shared experience. The slow, mutable hours encouraged a collective pace, one measured by light and labor rather than minutes and deadlines. So, as you feel your eyes grow heavy, think about this elastic sense of time hours that breathe with the seasons, stretching under summer's heat and shrinking beneath winter's cold. It's a reminder that time is a living thing, once measured by sun and shadow rather than second hands and digital displays. And perhaps, in the quiet of your own night, there's a lesson in that to loosen your grip on rigid schedules and sink gently into the natural flow that has cradled humanity for millennia. You remain nestled in the soft cadence of monastic life, now turning your attention to the canonical hours, those sacred divisions of the day that shaped every breath and action in the monastery. These hours were not just markers of time, they were a framework of devotion, a ritualized heartbeat punctuating the monk's existence from dawn until nightfall. Known by names like matins, lauds, prime, terce, sext, nun, vespers, and compline. These hours divided the day into specific times for prayer, reflection, and work. For you, the idea that a day could be mapped out by moments devoted to spiritual attention might feel both foreign and oddly comforting. Instead of the usual rush of tasks and deadlines, these hours offered a rhythm grounded in mindfulness and sacred purpose. The canonical hours were a lifeline to God, each one calling the monks to pause, to lift their voices or hearts in prayer, to reset their focus amid the endless demands of the day. You probably wouldn't survive the monotony of chanting multiple times daily without a good sense of humor or a strong voice. But for them, this was the norm. What's fascinating and often overlooked is how these prayer times were carefully interwoven with the natural flow of the day and the variable hours you just pondered. Since daylight changed with the seasons, so too did the timing of these prayers shift. For example, prime, the first hour after sunrise, might begin at different clock times depending on whether it was summer or winter. This seasonal adjustment meant that monks' schedules flexed naturally, tethered not to a rigid clock but to the ebb and flow of sunlight. Historians still debate how precisely this system was followed in every monastery, especially in smaller or remote communities where strict timing might have been more aspirational than practical. Nonetheless, the principle was clear: the canonical hours served as both a temporal and spiritual scaffold, guiding the monks through a sacred landscape of time. You might smile at the quirky names of these hours, each hinting at a deeper tradition. Matins, the long night prayer often said before dawn, demanded a hearty spirit. Lauds greeted the daybreak with praises, a poetic nod to the rising sun. Prime marked the start of daytime prayers. Terce, sext, and nun corresponded roughly to the third, sixth, and ninth hours of daylight mid-morning, noon, and mid-afternoon respectively, and vespers and compline closed the day with evening and night prayers. Imagine trying to memorize all these Latin names while still mastering the monastery's rules about silence, humility, and labor. And yes, some monks found creative ways to keep these hours distinct, sometimes marking time by the ringing of bells or the lighting of candles, which gave the day a palpable rhythm. It's a bit like having your schedule dictated by a series of musical notes rather than a flashing digital clock. This sacred timetable wasn't just a matter of habit. It was believed to sanctify time itself. Each prayer interrupted the mundane, transforming ordinary hours into moments of divine connection. The monks understood their lives as a continuous offering, and the canonical hours were the beats of that offering, marking the passage of time with reverence and discipline. This perspective may seem alien to modern ears, accustomed to multitasking and fragmented attention, but it shaped an entire worldview where time was a gift, not a burden. A quirky bit of monastic lore tells of some communities where monks sometimes mixed up the hours, accidentally singing lauds during vespers or vice versa, leading to mild confusion and quiet amusement. While such slip-ups were rare, they remind us that even the most disciplined religious orders were composed of humans prone to error and whimsy. It's oddly comforting to think that medieval monks, with their strict schedules, had moments of light-hearted forgetfulness, proof that no system, no matter how sacred, is immune to the occasional hiccup. The canonical hours also structured the monks' work. After a prayer session, they might head to the scriptorium to copy manuscripts, tend to the garden, or perform chores around the monastery. Each task was framed by prayer, creating a cycle of spiritual focus and practical labor. This fusion of work and worship reflects a medieval ideal known as ora et labora prae, and work a balance that aimed to sanctify all aspects of daily life. You can almost hear the gentle clang of tools and the rustle of parchment between prayers. As the monastery buzzes quietly with purpose, you may wonder how monks kept track of these hours without clocks. But as you've seen, bells played a critical role. The monastery's bell tower wasn't just architectural flair, it was a vital timekeeping instrument. Each canonical hour was announced by a distinctive pattern of bell tolls, summoning monks from their cells to the chapel. This auditory signal reached beyond the monastery walls, too, often regulating the lives of nearby villagers who depended on the monks' timekeeping. Historians still debate how standardized these bell signals were, whether every monastery had its unique pattern, or if regional traditions dominated. Regardless, the sound of bells marking time became synonymous with monastic life and medieval community rhythms. And here's an odd little fact you might enjoy: some monasteries employed a monk called the campanarius, whose sole job was to ring the bells. This wasn't just an errand boy role, it was a position of responsibility and even artistry. The campanarius had to know the correct sequences and timing for each hour's call, and sometimes his skill was a matter of pride within the community. You could think of him as a human metronome, setting the monastery's tempo. In a way, he was the original DJ of monastic time. The spiritual dimension of the canonical hours extended beyond mere routine. The monks saw their lives as a continuous liturgy, and the division of the day into these prayerful moments was a way of entering into sacred time. This was a concept explored and debated by theologians for centuries: how human time could intersect with divine eternity. The canonical hours became a tangible expression of this mystery, a way to make the invisible visible through ritual and repetition. For the monks, each hour was not just a measure of passing moments, but an opportunity for spiritual awakening. As you drift deeper into the quiet embrace of sleep, imagine the monks gathering in the dim chapel, voices rising in chant, filling the stone walls with sound that echoed through centuries. Their time was counted not by numbers, but by devotion, by presence, and by the steady rhythm of prayer. It's a system that asks you to slow down, to listen to the subtle music of the day's unfolding, and to find peace in repetition. Remember that early dawn you heard about in the first section? The canonical hours begin there, threading that first soft light through the entire fabric of monastic life. It's a gentle reminder that time can be both measured and felt, both practical and sacred, a paradox that medieval monks embraced fully. And perhaps tonight, as your breathing slows and your thoughts fade, you'll carry a bit of that paradox with you, a soft whisper of time as something more than minutes. As you settle further into the monastery's unfolding day, the soundscape around you becomes an invisible clock, marking moments not by gears or digits, but by bells and natural cues. The striking of bells, carried on the crisp morning air or muffled within thick stone walls, was the medieval monks' primary signal for time, their way to announce the sacred hours and organize communal life. Imagine standing in the cool courtyard, the air heavy with the scent of damp stone and melting frost, when suddenly the deep, resonant toll of the bell reverberates, pulling every monk from their tasks or prayers. These bell calls were not random clangs, but carefully regulated sounds that carried meaning across the monastery and into the surrounding village. In fact, monks often considered the bell their most faithful companion, an audible heartbeat that kept their lives in harmonious rhythm with the sacred hours. You probably wouldn't guess how crucial this bell system was until you imagine living without any clocks or watches, where the sound of a bell was the only reliable way to know when to stop copying manuscripts or begin prayer. The bell ringing was a craft in itself, carried out by the campanarius, a monk trained in the art of timing and tone. This role required patience and precision because the pattern and length of bell tolls conveyed different messages. For example, the call to matins, often before dawn, had a distinct rhythm from the noon call to sext. Bells might toll slowly for a long vigil, or ring rapidly for a brief summons. In some monasteries, the bell sequences even formed simple melodies, creating an almost musical layer to the passing of time. Historians still debate the exact extent to which these bells were standardized across regions, but there's no doubt that the sound of bells defined monastic life. They were audible timekeepers that transcended sight and replaced the modern visual clock faces. You might think of them as the original notifications that everyone was expected to heed. Beyond the bells, natural sounds also played a vital role in marking moments throughout the day. The first crow of a rooster, the distant barking of a dog, or even the rhythmic clang of the blacksmith's hammer in the nearby village offered sensory cues that complemented the auditory signals of the bells. Monks were keen observers of their environment. They attuned their senses to these subtle indicators, integrating them into their daily rhythms. This blending of man-made and natural sounds created a rich, immersive timekeeping experience. Imagine the way the sudden call of a bird might remind a monk it's time for terse prayer, or the fading light might signal Compline's approach. Time was a multisensory experience, not just a numerical abstraction. Here's a curious detail: some monasteries also employed timekeepers who would walk the cloisters or grounds, carrying staffs or wooden blocks to strike at certain intervals. These sounds help monks inside dark cells or distant workshops keep track of time without needing to see the bell tower. The idea of a human metronome, walking the halls to ensure everyone stayed on schedule, seems oddly quaint compared to your phone's silent vibration alerts, but it was effective in its own way. These methods remind you just how creative medieval monks had to be in managing time without digital conveniences. Water clocks and sand timers also began making appearances in some monasteries, serving as early technological aids to measure passing time during specific tasks or rituals. Water clocks, or clepsydras, involved the regulated flow of water from one vessel to another, marking intervals as water levels dropped or rose. Sand timers worked similarly, with sand flowing through a narrow neck between two glass bulbs. Both devices were imperfect and required frequent resetting or calibration, but they offered a tactile and visual way to measure segments of time, especially for shorter periods like sermons or scripture readings. Historians still argue how widespread these tools were and whether monks relied on them daily or reserved them for special occasions. Nevertheless, these primitive clocks symbolize a key shift: the move from purely natural and auditory time signals toward mechanical and measurable timekeeping. You might picture a monk nervously watching a water clock, careful not to spill a drop, as the slow drip marked the length of a prayer or a lecture, or perhaps a novice flipping an hourglass repeatedly during study, counting the sand grains like what's a modern student staring at a countdown timer. These devices offered an early taste of quantified time, a seed that would eventually blossom into the complex clockworks that came later. But even with these gadgets, the dominant time signals remained the bells and natural cues, woven deeply into monastic culture. One particularly quirky practice involved the use of time stones, small, carved stones or markers placed along paths or in gardens that cast shadows used as sundials. Monks would glance at these markers to estimate the sun's position and, by extension, the approximate time. Unlike the grand sundials found in town squares, these were humble makeshift tools, blending utility with the aesthetic simplicity the monastic life favored. The presence of these stones reflects the monk's deep connection to the physical environment as a guide to time. It's a quiet, poetic reminder that before artificial lights and digital displays, the world itself was a clock. You can almost hear the gentle chime of a bell ringing the hour, mingling with the soft rustle of pages turning in the scriptorium and the distant murmur of prayers rising from the chapel. The monastery was a place where time was not just counted, but felt a steady pulse that guided the monks' lives with care and intention. The absence of harsh alarms or flashing numbers created a rhythm that was both disciplined and serene. The ringing bells did not hurry them. They called them to presence. Of course, this bell and natural sound system was not without challenges. Weather could muffle or distort the bells. Fog or storms might delay the sound's travel, confusing those who relied on it. At times, the bells could be too loud, disturbing monks who needed silence for contemplation. And accidents happened, bells cracked, or ropes snapped, causing temporary silence that threw off the daily schedule. These mishaps remind us that medieval life was not as orderly as the polished image we sometimes imagine. Instead, it was lived with resilience, improvisation, and a healthy acceptance of imperfection. As you cozy up under your blanket, imagine that distant bell tolling in the cool night air, calling monks to compline, the final prayer before rest. Its sound fades slowly into the darkness, a soft echo of order and peace. This bell is not just a sound, but a symbol of how humans have long sought to measure and honor time's passing. For medieval monks, the ringing bells and ambient sounds were a lifeline, threading their days together in a sacred and natural pattern. It's a world far removed from buzzing phones and flashing screens, but somehow more intimate, more connected to the steady heartbeat of the earth itself. You move now into the quieter, less obvious corners of medieval monasteries, where timekeeping took a more mechanical but still rudimentary form. Water clocks and sand timers simple. Early technologies began to supplement bells and natural cues, adding a new dimension to how monks measured passing moments. Imagine a small room dimly lit by candlelight, where a clepsydra, a water clock, slowly drips water from one vessel into another, marking time not by sound or shadow, but by the silent, steady flow of liquid. This device was a marvel for its day, an early attempt to make time visible and measurable. Water clocks had ancient roots, tracing back to the Greeks and Romans, but their medieval use was both practical and symbolic, demonstrating humanity's growing desire to quantify and control time. Yet historians still argue whether these devices were widespread or confined to a few wealthy monasteries with the means to maintain them. Given the delicate craftsmanship and regular maintenance they required, the sand timer or hourglass is probably more familiar to you, having survived in popular imagination and iconography as the ultimate symbol of time slipping away. In medieval monasteries, hourglasses were practical tools for measuring shorter periods, such as the length of a sermon, a meal, or a vigil. You might picture a novice monk flipping a small glass timer, watching the sand slowly fall through the narrow neck as a silent reminder to stay attentive or complete a task. Unlike water clocks, hourglasses were portable and less prone to malfunction from freezing or evaporation, making them quite handy in chilly stone cloisters or drafty scriptoriums. However, they were not without quirks. Uneven sand grains or slight tilting could throw off their accuracy, and flipping them mid-flow was both an art and a temptation for the lazy. In fact, some monks reportedly joked that a cleverly timed flip of the hourglass was the medieval equivalent of stretching a deadline. It's a reminder that even in monastic discipline, human nature poked through. These early devices symbolized a fascinating tension in medieval monastic life, the desire to order and measure time precisely, yet the reality of imperfection and impermanence. Water clocks needed constant care. Any clog or crack could halt their flow, while hourglasses, despite their simplicity, required vigilance to ensure they were used correctly. Monks' efforts to master these tools reflect a larger shift in medieval society toward mechanical timekeeping that would eventually lead to the grand astronomical clocks and tower timepieces of later centuries. You can almost see the monks gathering around a new hourglass or water clock, marveling at this step toward controlling the invisible river of time. Interestingly, some monasteries combined these devices with bells and natural observations, creating layered systems of timekeeping. For instance, a water clock might be set to signal when to ring a bell or mark the start of a prayer hour. This multi-pronged approach speaks to the monks' pragmatic adaptability. They recognized the limitations of any one method and sought redundancy. In a world without digital backup, this was an ancient version of fail-safe engineering. You could say they were proto-engineers of time, blending nature, sound, and machinery in an attempt to tame the day. There's also a charming legend about a particular abbey where a giant water clock was installed in the courtyard, so large it became a landmark visible from miles away. This clock had decorative statues that moved with the water's flow, a medieval fusion of art and technology. While such extravagant installations were rare, they hint at the fascination medieval monks and lay people had with time's measurement. These clocks were not merely practical devices, but also objects of wonder, blending faith, science, and craftsmanship. Historians still debate how common such ornate clocks were, and whether their complexity was more symbolic than functional. You might find it amusing that, despite their desire for order, medieval monks were often at the mercy of these imperfect devices. If a water clock ran dry or froze in winter, monks simply had to improvise, relying more heavily on bells or natural cues until repairs were made. This reality speaks to a broader medieval truth: technology, no matter how advanced for its time, was always intertwined with the unpredictability of nature and human care. Unlike your sleek digital clock, these devices required constant attention, a physical connection to the flow of time rather than an invisible, unerring pulse. In addition to water and sand timers, monks also used candle clocks, candles marked with intervals that burned down at predictable rates. This method was especially useful during long night prayers, when visual cues were scarce. You might picture a line of candles flickering softly in the chapel, each one a fragile measure of passing moments, its melting wax a reminder of time's steady consumption. Candle clocks were inexpensive and simple, but, like all medieval timekeepers, imperfect. Drafts, wax quality, and candle thickness affected their burn rate, yet they added another sensory layer: light and warmth to the monks' experience of time. Historians still debate the extent of candle clock use, but their presence in monastic settings is well documented. All these devices, water clocks, hourglasses, candle clocks, reflect a medieval mindset, increasingly curious about measuring and mastering time. Even as spiritual life emphasized surrender and acceptance, it's a fascinating paradox. Monks sought to keep precise schedules to honor God's order, yet their tools were often as fickle as the seasons they lived through. You might imagine a monk muttering under his breath as a water clock dripped too slowly, or laughing quietly when an hourglass was accidentally knocked askew during chores. This human element animates the often austere image of monastic timekeeping. Looking beyond the monastery walls, these early timekeeping methods also influenced secular life. Towns and guilds began experimenting with similar devices, signaling a slow but steady march toward the mechanical clocks that would transform Europe. Yet for centuries, monasteries remained at the forefront of time measurement, balancing tradition, devotion, and innovation. Their humble water clocks and sand timers were early steps on a path that eventually led to the complex tower clocks and watches we take for granted today. So, as you sink further into your own night's rest, imagine those fragile devices quietly marking time in dim cloisters, the steady drip of water, the falling sand grains, the melting candle wax, each a small ritual in a long history of human attempts to hold time still. In a way, these simple machines embody the medieval monk's paradoxical relationship with time, part science, part art, and wholly human. You now find yourself immersed in the shifting seasons, feeling how the monastery's daily rhythms bend and flex as daylight stretches long in summer and shrinks short in winter. This seasonal dance was no mere backdrop, but a fundamental force shaping how monks counted and experienced time. Imagine standing beside a garden cloaked in morning mist, the sun climbing higher and lingering late into the evening during summer months, offering endless hours to work, pray, and study. Then picture the same garden blanketed in snow, dusk arriving just as the first meal is eaten, darkness swallowing the day before most tasks could be completed. This ebb and flow forced monks to constantly adjust their routines, blending fixed spiritual duties with flexible practicalities. Unlike your modern, artificially lit world where daylight barely influences your schedule, medieval monasteries lived intimately by the sun's rise and fall, their very concept of an hour stretching or shrinking with the season's mood. The shifting daylight meant that the canonical hours, as you've heard before, did not have fixed clock times. Instead, their placement moved to fit the length of the day. In the long days of summer, morning prayers might begin earlier, while in winter they came late, wrapped in darkness and cold. Historians still debate how strictly monks adhered to these shifting schedules, whether some monasteries maintained stricter discipline or allowed more flexibility when daylight was scarce. Regardless, this seasonal adjustment was both a challenge and a necessity. It required a keen awareness of nature's signals and a willingness to embrace change rather than resist it. You probably wouldn't enjoy such variability if your alarm clock were tied to the sun. But for monks, it was a deeply spiritual lesson in patience and presence. You can almost feel the changing textures of the seasons, the sharp chill of frost biting at exposed skin during winter prayers, the soft warmth of late afternoon sun casting long shadows in summer's quiet hours. These sensory experiences weren't just background. They were woven into the monk's understanding of time itself. The lengthening and shortening of days became a rhythm to honor, a reminder of life's impermanence and renewal. This seasonal awareness reinforced the monastic ideal of living in harmony with creation rather than conquering it. The passage of time was not an enemy to beat, but a teacher to follow. One particularly interesting seasonal adaptation involved the practice of folding certain prayers during the winter months, combining multiple canonical hours into fewer services to accommodate the darker, colder days. This practical modification allowed monks to maintain spiritual discipline without overtaxing themselves in the harshest seasons. However, not all monasteries adopted this practice uniformly. Some maintained the full prayer schedule regardless of daylight, emphasizing devotion over convenience. This divergence has sparked scholarly debate about the balance between strict observance and pragmatic adaptation in medieval monastic life. The seasonal shift also influenced monastic labor. During the long summer days, monks could devote more hours to gardening, manuscript copying, and repairs, tasks that required daylight and warmth. Conversely, winter's brevity demanded focus on indoor work, study, and extended prayer times by candlelight. This division created a natural ebb and flow of activity that mirrored the world outside. You might chuckle at the thought that medieval monks had their own kind of seasonal work-life balance. Long before modern buzzwords existed, another quirky detail comes from records of some monasteries where monks would ceremoniously mark the changing seasons with special rituals, lighting extra candles during the darkest nights or celebrating the solstice with extended vigils. These ceremonies were both spiritual and practical, acknowledging the profound influence of the sun's cycle on their lives. You can almost see them gathering in stone chapels, flickering flames casting dancing shadows, voices lifted in songs that honored light's return or departure. These moments remind you that timekeeping was as much about honoring cosmic rhythms as it was about human schedules. Interestingly, the monks' seasonal timekeeping also affected the surrounding communities. Villagers looked to the monastery not only for spiritual guidance, but for signals about agricultural and social time. The ringing bells that marked canonical hours helped regulate village life, setting times for work, meals, and rest. In this way, the monastery's flexible, sun-based timekeeping radiated outward, shaping the entire local temporal landscape. You might think of the monastery as a kind of time hub, its rhythms pulsing gently through the lives of everyone nearby. Yet, this seasonally flexible time was not without frustration. During the darkest months, when days were short and weather forbidding, the monotony and constraints weighed heavily on monks' spirits and bodies. Long nights of prayer and limited daylight for work tested their endurance. Some records hint at grumbles over the difficulty of maintaining strict schedules in such conditions, revealing a very human side beneath the austere exterior. This struggle between ideal discipline and lived reality is a theme that threads through monastic history. As you feel the weight of your own days passing, consider how different it would be to live where the length of your hour changes with the seasons, where time itself breathes and shifts rather than ticks evenly forward. For medieval monks, this variability was a teacher, a constant reminder that life flows with nature's pulse. They lived the paradox of order within change, structure within fluidity, a lesson that resonates quietly in our frantic modern world. So, as your eyelids grow heavy and your breath deepens, imagine the monastery at twilight, shadows lengthening, bells tolling the evening prayers earlier in the year and later in summer. Picture the monks adjusting their cloaks against chill winds, marking the passing season not just in time but in spirit. This seasonality of timekeeping binds their lives to the eternal dance of light and dark, a rhythm both ancient and enduring. As night descends on the monastery, you lift your gaze to the heavens, where stars begin to punctuate the velvet darkness, serving as celestial markers for time long before mechanical clocks or streetlights ever existed. Medieval monks were keen astronomers, not just in the sense of scientific curiosity, but as part of their sacred duty to align their prayers and schedules with the cosmic order. You imagine the cloister's stone walls bathed in moonlight as monks step outside to consult the night sky, reading constellations to guide their vigils and night prayers. The stars became silent, steady companions in their temporal journey, providing reliable signals when daylight disappeared. It's fascinating to realize that these same stars, which might now seem distant and decorative, were once vital beacons helping regulate the rhythm of monastic life. Historians still debate how systematic these astronomical observations were across monasteries, but there is no doubt that the night sky played a significant role in medieval timekeeping. In particular, the monks relied on well-known constellations and celestial events to estimate the passage of night hours, especially for the observance of matins and other nocturnal offices. The movement of the stars, slow and predictable, offered a counterpoint to the more variable daylight hours. For example, the position of the pole star, fixed in the northern sky, helped orient monks during their midnight prayers and allowed them to estimate the hour by observing how other stars moved around it. The Pleiades and Orion's belt were also popular reference points, easily recognizable and imbued with symbolic meaning in medieval Christian cosmology. You probably hadn't considered that stargazing could be part of a monk's daily routine, but in the absence of clocks, the heavens were the ultimate timekeepers. One of the more intriguing, less mainstream practices involved the use of nocturnal instruments, early devices designed to help measure time by the stars. These simple wooden or metal tools, somewhat like primitive star charts, allowed monks to align a sighting mechanism with certain constellations to tell the hour of the night. While these devices were not highly precise, they reflected an impressive fusion of faith, astronomy, and practical need. Some monasteries treasured these tools, passing them down through generations as sacred relics of both science and spirituality. However, scholars continued to debate how widespread and reliable these nocturnals were, given the limited technology and the skill required to use them effectively. You might find it charming that monks often interpreted celestial phenomena not only for timekeeping, but also for signs and omens. Comets, eclipses, or unusual star alignments were frequently recorded with both awe and apprehension, believed to signal divine messages or earthly upheavals. This intertwining of astronomy with theology illustrates the medieval mindset, where the heavens were alive with spiritual significance, and time itself was part of a divine narrative. Unlike our modern, often secular approach to astronomy, medieval monks saw the stars as both guides and storytellers. Nighttime in the monastery was also punctuated by practical observations of natural sounds and cycles. Owls hooting in the distance, the rustle of nocturnal animals, or the silence of the sleeping earth became part of the sensory backdrop for monks on night watch. These subtle cues complemented the stars and helped monks maintain their vigil through the long hours before dawn. You might imagine the stillness broken only by whispered prayers and the gentle footsteps of the night porter. This immersive nocturnal environment was both a spiritual challenge and a meditative opportunity, demanding vigilance and calm endurance. Astronomical knowledge wasn't limited to monks alone. Some monasteries became centers of learning, preserving and expanding upon classical works by Ptolemy, Al-Batani, and others. Through careful study, monks improved calendars and developed more accurate methods for predicting celestial events. These scholarly efforts laid important groundwork for the later scientific revolution. It's a fascinating irony that cloistered monks, often stereotyped as isolated and rigid, were actually key players in advancing medieval astronomy and timekeeping. They bridged ancient wisdom and emerging scientific inquiry, all within the service of their spiritual calling. There's also a whimsical aspect to this celestial attention. Some monks reportedly assigned moral qualities to certain stars or constellations, believing that their movements could influence human character or fate. While modern science laughs at such notions, they reveal a rich tapestry of belief where time, cosmos, and spirituality were inseparable. The night sky was a vast living manuscript, waiting to be read and interpreted with devotion and care. You might wonder how this star-based timekeeping intersected with the bells and sundials you've learned about. In practice, the nocturnal hours required different methods, since neither the sun nor bells could always provide clear signals during dark nights. Here, the stars became crucial for maintaining the monastic schedule, especially for prayers during the night and very early morning. This combination of celestial and terrestrial timekeeping exemplifies the medieval monks' holistic approach, embracing both heaven and earth as guides in their temporal and spiritual lives. As you prepare to drift off, picture the monks looking upward in quiet contemplation, finding solace and structure in the constellations above. Their gaze connects them across centuries to countless others who have used the stars to navigate not just geography, but the very flow of time. This stargazing was both a scientific exercise and a prayer, a moment where the infinite cosmos touched the finite human experience. You may not have star charts by your bedside, but in the quiet darkness, you share a fragment of that ancient communion. The night sky's slow turning is a silent metronome, a reminder that time's passage is both steady and mysterious. In the monastery, under the watchful eyes of celestial sentinels, time was less a measured quantity and more a sacred rhythm to be honored. For medieval monks, the stars told stories, measured hours, and inspired awe, a poetic reminder that even in the darkest nights, light guides the way. You step now into the shadowy, often overlooked corners of medieval timekeeping, the horologium, those mysterious and varied time-measuring devices that dotted monastery grounds like silent sentinels of order. The word horologium itself might sound like a grand clock tower, but in medieval times it referred to a range of instruments designed to mark the passage of hours, from simple sundials to more complex mechanical contraptions that were still rare and experimental. Picture a stone pedestal in a monastery courtyard, topped with a carefully carved sundial, its gnomon casting a shifting shadow over etched lines that mark the variable hours you've come to know. This humble instrument was one of the few visual physical ways monks could see time during daylight hours, supplementing the bells and natural cues that had long governed their days. Yet the horologium was more than a tool. It was a symbol of mankind's growing desire to grasp and make sense of time's elusive flow. Historians still argue about how widespread horologia were in early medieval monasteries and how accurately monks could read them, given weather conditions and the complexities of variable hours. Imagine, if you will, the careful craftsmanship that went into these sundials, carved from local stone or sometimes metal. The faces bore intricate markings calibrated for the monastery's latitude and adjusted for the seasonally shifting length of daylight. Some even included inscriptions with biblical verses or symbolic motifs, merging functionality with spirituality. These devices were often placed in prominent, sunny spots where monks and visitors alike could consult them. There's a poetic quality to the sundial's slow-moving shadow, tracing the passage of time in a visible arc, a tangible connection between the heavens, earth, and human devotion. Yet, despite their beauty and ingenuity, sundials came with limitations. Overcast skies rendered them useless, and their readings required a trained eye and steady hand to interpret. Beyond sundials, the horologium category also encompassed emerging mechanical clocks complex, gear-driven machines that began appearing in the late Middle Ages. While these clocks were scarce and expensive at first, monasteries were among the first institutions to adopt them, eager to improve the precision of their timekeeping. These early mechanical clocks, often installed in towers, chimed the canonical hours with increasing regularity, reducing reliance on natural signals or human bell ringers. You might envision a towering mechanism of wheels and weights, hidden behind stone walls, its rhythmic ticking a new kind of heartbeat for the monastery. Historians debate the exact timeline and accuracy of these early clocks, as well as their impact on monastic life and the broader medieval society. The introduction of mechanical horologia represented a major shift. Time was becoming not just observed but regulated, standardized, and commodified. Monks who had once measured hours by sun and prayer now had a fixed, audible marker that didn't bend with the seasons or clouds. This was both a blessing and a challenge. The rigid mechanical hours demanded new disciplines and altered traditional rhythms. Some monks welcomed the clarity and order, while others grumbled at the loss of flexibility and the mechanical intrusion into sacred time. It's easy to imagine the debates over whether a clock's relentless ticking was a gift or a curse, an echo of our own ambivalence toward modern technology. You might be amused to learn that the earliest mechanical clocks didn't have faces or hands like your wristwatch. Instead, they simply rang bells at set intervals, making their presence known through sound alone. This made the bell tower all the more essential, turning timekeeping into an auditory experience. The phrase "time to ring the bell" was quite literal, and the campaneris's role became even more critical. In some monasteries, the clock's mechanism and the bell system were linked, with gears triggering hammers to strike bells automatically. This mechanization not only improved accuracy, but also freed monks from the laborious task of manual bell ringing. You could say these were the first automated reminders, primitive predecessors to the notifications flooding your phone today. Horologia also held symbolic weight. They embodied the medieval aspiration to harmonize human life with divine order. The precise measurement of time was seen as a way to glimpse God's eternal plan, bringing earthly chaos into celestial alignment. This philosophical dimension added layers of meaning to what might otherwise seem a dry, technical innovation. Monastic scholars wrote about time as both a gift and a trial, a linear and cyclical phenomenon, and the horologium was a physical manifestation of that complex idea. It stood at the intersection of faith, science, and art. Yet, despite their grandeur and symbolism, horologia were fallible. Mechanical failures were common, and maintenance required skilled artisans rarely found within monastic walls. Some monasteries relied on external clockmakers, blending sacred vocation with secular craft, weather, dust, and where all conspired to disrupt the smooth running of these early clocks, reminding monks that no matter the precision of their instruments, time's flow remained ultimately beyond control. These imperfections lent a humbling quality to the quest for perfect time. An interesting anecdote survives of a particular horologium that, for years, ran consistently 10 minutes slow, causing mild confusion and amusement among the monks. Instead of correcting it immediately, the community grew accustomed to this lazy clock, joking that it was a reminder to slow down spiritually. Such stories highlight the human side of monastic timekeeping, the balance between striving for order and embracing imperfection. The horologium's legacy extends beyond the monastery. These early time-measuring devices laid the groundwork for the town clocks and public timekeeping that would transform medieval cities. Monasteries were incubators of this technology, bridging ancient sundials and modern chronometers. The gradual shift from variable to fixed hours reshaped not only monastic life but the entire European perception of time. It's a story of innovation wrapped in faith, craft, and community. So, as you settle into the quiet of your own evening, consider the horologium's slow-moving shadow or the rhythmic toll of its bells as more than historical curiosities. They are echoes of humanity's enduring desire to hold time gently, to measure the unmeasurable, and to find meaning in each passing hour. In that slow, solemn marking of time, you share a thread of connection with countless monks who, centuries ago, looked to sundials and clocks not just for order but for a glimpse of eternity. You now find yourself observing the delicate balancing act that defined the monk's daily existence, harmonizing labor, prayer, and rest with the ever-shifting flow of time. Monastic life was not simply about endless devotion, it was a carefully choreographed dance where each activity had its allotted moment, punctuated by the canonical hours and governed by the subtle cues of nature and bell tolls. Imagine the monastery's stone corridors humming softly with activity. Some monks bent over manuscripts in the scriptorium, their quills scratching ancient words. Others tended to gardens, pruning herbs under a pale sun. A few carried out repairs on worn wooden furniture or the chapel's stonework. All these tasks were interwoven with prayers and moments of stillness, creating a rhythm that was both rigorous and profoundly human. You probably wouldn't survive the austerity without a bit of mental flexibility and a strong sense of purpose. But for the monks, this blend of labor and worship was a sacred calling. Monastic labor wasn't random or endless drudgery. It was carefully timed and imbued with spiritual significance. The rule of Saint Benedict, which governed many Western monasteries, prescribed specific hours for work that fit seamlessly between the prayers. Work was not seen as a mere necessity, but as a form of prayer itself, an extension of devotion into action. This ora et labora principle meant that monks approached their daily tasks with mindfulness and intention, recognizing the sacred in the mundane. You might picture a monk wielding a scythe with the same reverence as chanting psalms, understanding that both were offerings to God. The division of labor followed the natural cycles you've come to know: the length of daylight, and the seasons affected what kinds of work were prioritized. During long summer days, there was more time for outdoor activities like farming, tending livestock, and maintaining the monastery grounds. In the shorter, colder days of winter, indoor tasks such as manuscript copying, repairing, and study took precedence. This seasonal adjustment demanded flexibility and resilience, qualities monks cultivated as part of their spiritual discipline. You might chuckle to think that medieval monks had their own version of working from home when snowbound, swapping hoes for quills and hammers for inkpots. Yet, balancing work and prayer wasn't always smooth sailing. Monks had to be vigilant not to let labor overshadow devotion or vice versa. The tension between physical toil and spiritual focus created moments of friction and human struggle. Some monks reportedly complained about heavy workloads during busy seasons, or felt challenged by the rigor of multiple daily prayers, interrupting their tasks. These candid glimpses reveal that monastic life, far from being idyllic, required constant negotiation between the demands of the body and the yearnings of the soul. You may find it intriguing that certain monasteries specialized in particular crafts or industries, making their labor not only a spiritual practice but also a form of economic contribution. Some were renowned for producing wine, cheese, or illuminated manuscripts, while others maintained extensive gardens and orchards. This work often involved a structured timetable, with shifts and roles assigned according to both skill and the canonical hours. The monastery was thus both a spiritual community and a functioning economic unit, with timekeeping essential to coordinating these dual roles. The relationship between labor and time was also reflected in the way monasteries organized communal meals. These were usually simple affairs, timed precisely between prayers and work. Monks ate in silence or while listening to scripture readings, keeping their focus on nourishment for the body and mind without distraction. Mealtimes acted as important temporal anchors, structuring the day and reinforcing the rhythm you've witnessed. Historians still debate the exact timing and frequency of these meals, as records vary between orders and regions, but the consensus remains that eating was another carefully measured moment in monastic time. Sometimes, monastic labor intersected with timekeeping in fascinating ways. For example, certain tasks like tending the herbal garden or baking bread had to be done at specific times of day or year to ensure efficacy. Timing was crucial. Herbs harvested at dawn might have been considered more potent. Bread needed precise baking intervals, and fermentation required patient waiting. This practical knowledge blended observation, tradition, and a bit of trial and error, reminding you that medieval monks were early practitioners of what we might now call process optimization. Their work was both a science and a sacred duty. A particularly charming story from monastic records tells of a novice monk who, eager to prove his diligence, overworked himself and neglected prayers, leading to a gentle reprimand from his superior. This anecdote highlights the delicate balance monks had to maintain, and the understanding that neither labor nor prayer should dominate excessively. The rhythm of the day demanded harmony, not haste or neglect. You might wonder how this tightly scheduled life dealt with unexpected interruptions, illness, visitors, or emergencies. Monasteries had protocols for such events, often delaying or adjusting prayers and work to accommodate reality. Yet the ideal remained a steady, predictable rhythm, a temporal architecture designed to sanctify every hour. This architecture was both a guide and a discipline, shaping monks' experience of time as a continuous offering. Outside the cloister walls, the monastery's labor and timekeeping influenced the surrounding community. Monks supplied food, medicine, and knowledge, while their measured schedule provided a framework for local peasants and tradespeople. The monastery's bells and visible routines anchored village life, setting a communal tempo that echoed through fields and markets. In this way, monastic time was not insular but integrally connected to the broader world, a heartbeat that resonated beyond stone walls. As you feel your own body relaxing, consider the monks working quietly in candlelit rooms, their hands steady, their minds focused, weaving the sacred and the practical into a seamless day. Their time was counted not just by hours or minutes, but by the quality and intention of each action. It's a profound reminder that time is not merely what passes, but what we do with its passing. So, as your eyes grow heavy and the world softens into dreams, imagine the monk's balanced day, unfolding prayers rising and falling, hands moving with purpose, the steady tolling of bells threading through work and rest. It's a rhythm both ancient and enduring, inviting you to find your own harmony within the flow of time. You turn your attention now to the abbot, the monastic figure whose role was as much temporal as spiritual, a leader tasked with orchestrating the complex dance of time, discipline, and devotion that defined the monastery's life. The abbot was the living embodiment of order, the keeper of schedules, the arbiter who balanced mercy with rigor. Imagine a sturdy, contemplative presence in a stone chamber, poring over the day's plans, ensuring that prayers, labor, meals, and rest unfold in seamless harmony. For the monks under his charge, the abbot was not just a spiritual guide, but the ultimate temporal authority, whose word could shift the rhythm of the community. You probably wouldn't relish such responsibility, but the abbot embraced it as a sacred trust, a visible manifestation of divine order on earth. The abbot's authority extended deeply into how time was managed. He oversaw the ringing of bells, the adherence to canonical hours, and the scheduling of work and study. His role was to enforce the rule of Saint Benedict or other governing texts, which meticulously prescribed the monastery's temporal structure. This meant ensuring the community neither rushed nor dawdled, maintaining a steady pace that honored both God's commandments and the practical needs of the community. The abbot's decisions shaped the daily experience of time for every monk, setting a tone of discipline that could be both comforting and demanding. Yet the abbot's leadership was not purely mechanical or authoritarian. He was expected to cultivate wisdom, patience, and compassion, recognizing that timekeeping was ultimately about nurturing the monk's spiritual growth. Balancing the ideal of strict observance with the realities of human frailty required skill and empathy. Some abbots became beloved figures for their gentle guidance, while others earned reputations for strictness. Historians still debate the extent to which abbots exercised personal discretion versus rigidly enforcing rules, a dynamic that influenced how time was lived within the monastery. Imagine the abbot walking through the cloisters, his presence a quiet signal that time to cease work or begin prayer had arrived. His voice, whether issuing a call to order or offering encouragement, shaped the monastery's rhythm. Stories survive of abbots who adjusted schedules seasonally, relaxed rules for infirm monks, or innovated new timekeeping practices to improve communal harmony. This human dimension adds texture to the notion of monastic time as rigid and unyielding. In reality, it was a living, breathing system shaped by the abbot's leadership. The abbot's temporal authority also extended to managing disputes about timekeeping, whether a bell was rung too early, a prayer missed, or work poorly timed. Such conflicts, though usually minor, reveal the tension inherent in regulating communal time. These disagreements sometimes required mediation and compromise, reminding you that even the most disciplined communities negotiated the flow of time rather than simply obeying it. This interplay between authority and adaptability is a key theme in the story of medieval time. A particularly intriguing aspect of the abbot's role was overseeing the maintenance and innovation of timekeeping devices, bells, horologia, water clocks, and, eventually, mechanical clocks. Some abbots took a personal interest in these technologies, commissioning new instruments or sponsoring repairs. This patronage reflects the monastery's evolving relationship with time as both spiritual rhythm and mechanical measurement. In some cases, abbots invited skilled craftsmen from outside to enhance the monastery's clocks, blending sacred duty with worldly expertise. You might find it amusing that abbots occasionally use timekeeping mishaps to teach lessons in humility and patience. For example, a delayed bell might be framed as a divine test, encouraging monks to accept imperfection with grace. Such stories underscore the spiritual dimension of time. In monastic life, it was not simply a tool, but a teacher, guiding monks toward virtues beyond punctuality. The abbot's influence extended beyond the monastery gates as well. In many communities, he served as a temporal leader for the surrounding villagers, mediating disputes, managing lands, and coordinating agricultural schedules. His role as keeper of time within the monastery often translated into broader social leadership. With the monastery's timekeeping rhythms shaping village life, this interconnectedness illustrates how monastic time was not isolated, but woven into the fabric of medieval society. As you settle deeper into the quietude of night, picture the abbot's steady gaze overseeing the monastery's flow of time, a watchful guardian ensuring that each hour is honored, each moment sanctified. His leadership transformed time from a mere measurement into a sacred discipline, a path toward spiritual harmony. So as your own breathing slows and your mind drifts, consider the abbot's role as both keeper and shepherd of time, a reminder that time is not only what we measure, but what we live, guide, and grace with meaning. In this gentle stewardship, centuries-old rhythms continue to whisper, inviting you to find your own place in the timeless dance. You step into the quiet struggles of medieval monastic timekeeping, where challenges and imperfections crept into the daily rhythm despite the monk's devotion and discipline. The ideal of perfectly measured hours, precisely rung bells, and exact prayer times often clashed with the realities of human error, mechanical failure, and the unpredictable forces of nature. Imagine a morning mist so thick that the sundial's shadow vanished, leaving monks unsure whether it was time for terce or still too early to disturb the silence. Or picture a bell rope frayed and snapped mid-toll, the expected summons falling into sudden silence and causing confusion throughout the cloisters. These everyday glitches remind you that medieval timekeeping was a fragile dance, balancing aspiration with circumstance. Historians still argue how monasteries coped with these issues and how much flexibility was allowed when schedules inevitably slipped. One of the most common problems was the unreliability of the tools themselves. Sundials required clear skies and careful placement. Water clocks needed constant maintenance to prevent clogging or freezing in cold weather. Early mechanical clocks were prone to inaccuracies and breakdowns. Even the bells, essential for communal coordination, were vulnerable to weather, wear, and the physical stamina of the bell ringer. These limitations meant monks often had to improvise, relying more heavily on natural cues or communal consensus when devices faltered. It's easy to imagine whispered debates in the refectory over whether the third-hour prayer had truly begun, or chuckles when a novice accidentally rang the wrong bell sequence. Human factors also complicated timekeeping. Monks were expected to maintain rigorous schedules, but fatigue, illness, or distraction could cause lapses. Some records tell of monks oversleeping their night prayers or mistiming their work periods, leading to gentle admonitions from superiors. This human imperfection did not go unnoticed, and abbots often reminded their communities that, while discipline was crucial, grace and understanding were equally necessary. The tension between strict order and compassionate flexibility was a constant negotiation in monastic life. Occasionally, environmental challenges threw off the monastery's temporal harmony. Seasonal weather extremes, heavy rains, snowstorms, or dense fog could muffle bell sounds or obscure sundials for days. In these moments, monks had to depend on experience and communal memory, trusting their intuition and the shared rhythm of life rather than mechanical precision. This reliance on human judgment over devices speaks to a time when time itself was a living, breathing presence rather than a rigid measurement. You might find it fascinating that some monasteries develop backup systems to counteract these challenges. For example, using multiple bells placed in different towers or locations ensured that at least one bell's sound carried through the weather. Some kept detailed written schedules to remind monks of prayer and work times when auditory or visual cues failed. Others relied on the experience of elder monks to call the community to order, blending technology, tradition, and human leadership into a resilient temporal system. Disputes over timekeeping occasionally surfaced, not out of rebellion but from genuine confusion or differing interpretations of schedules. Monks might argue whether a prayer was too early or late, or whether a particular work period should be extended due to unforeseen delays. These disagreements, though typically mild, reveal the complex social dynamics underlying even the most disciplined communities. The process of resolving such conflicts fostered a culture of patience, negotiation, and collective responsibility. There's a whimsical anecdote from a monastery where the bell ringer, after a long vigil, mistakenly rang the noon bell 3 hours early. Instead of reprimand, the monks turned it into a moment of levity, calling it the bell of early mercy, a humorous reminder that even sacred time could be bent by human frailty. These stories add warmth to the often austere image of monastic life, showing that imperfection was embraced with humor and grace. Technical failures also inspired innovation. Faced with the repeated mechanical breakdowns, some monasteries experimented with improving clock designs or developing more durable bell mechanisms. This spirit of problem-solving contributed to the gradual evolution of medieval horology and the increasing reliability of timekeeping devices. The monks were not merely passive recipients of technology. They actively engaged with its limitations and possibilities. The challenges of monastic timekeeping extended beyond the walls. 2. Villagers, depending on monastery bells for their daily schedule, experienced the same inconsistencies, affecting market times, work rhythms, and social events. This interconnectedness heightened the importance of clear and reliable time signals, adding social pressure on monasteries to maintain temporal order. You might think of the monastery as a temporal hub, whose pulse regulated not just religious life, but the broader community's heartbeat. Despite these difficulties, monks demonstrated remarkable resilience and adaptability. Their timekeeping practices, though imperfect, provided enough structure to sustain centuries of spiritual discipline and community life. They balanced reverence for tradition with practical flexibility, embodying a dynamic relationship with time that embraced both order and uncertainty. As you settle deeper into your own evening calm, imagine monks navigating these temporal challenges with quiet resolve, their faith steady amid the unpredictability of weather, tools, and human nature. Their imperfect yet enduring timekeeping systems offer a humble lesson that the measure of time is not just in minutes or bells, but in the grace with which we meet its passage. So, as your breath slows and your thoughts soften, reflect on the delicate art of living within time's fragile rhythms, a dance of intention and acceptance that has echoed through the ages, from stone cloisters to your quiet room tonight. You now glimpse the deep roots of medieval timekeeping, where the lingering influence of Roman systems shaped monastic hours and calendars. The Romans, with their sophisticated organization of days, hours, and festivals, left a lasting imprint on Europe, and medieval monks inherited much of this legacy. Picture monks poring over ancient manuscripts, copying texts that preserved Roman knowledge of sundials, calendars, and time divisions, blending classical heritage with Christian spirituality. The very concept of dividing the day into 12 hours, variable by season as you've seen, traces back to Roman practices. This inheritance wasn't just technical, but cultural, embedding a Roman sense of order and structure into the monastic conception of time. Historians continued to debate how directly and thoroughly these Roman methods influenced medieval timekeeping, given the centuries and transformations between them. But the connection remains undeniable. Roman sundials, water clocks, and calendars provided templates that monks adapted to their spiritual needs. For example, the Roman division of daylight into 12 horae aligned with the canonical hours' variable lengths. The use of Latin terminology for hours, months, and days further reflects this continuity. You might imagine monks reading these ancient texts, interpreting and reshaping them to fit the monastic rhythm of prayer and work. This fusion of pagan Rome's temporal order with Christian devotion created a hybrid system, both practical and symbolic. The Roman influence also extended to the liturgical calendar, which structured monastic time beyond daily hours into seasons and festivals. The calculation of Easter, the cycle of saints' days, and penitential periods drew on Roman calendrical knowledge, shaping how monks experienced and anticipated time. These cycles intertwined with the natural seasons, anchoring spiritual practice in the flow of the year. You may find it fascinating how deeply these ancient frameworks continued to shape medieval life, even as new innovations arose. Yet, this inheritance was not static. Medieval monks modified, debated, and sometimes challenged Roman methods to better suit their context. The variability of hours, the incorporation of new prayers, and the adjustments for local climates show an evolving relationship rather than mere preservation. Some scholars argue that medieval timekeeping was a creative reinterpretation of classical legacies filtered through the prism of Christian theology and monastic discipline. A quirky side note is that some monasteries preserved peculiar Roman timekeeping artifacts, like fragments of water clocks or sundials, treating them as relics of wisdom. These items were both practical tools and symbols connecting the present to a grand temporal lineage. Imagine a monk carefully polishing a Roman sundial, contemplating the unbroken thread of time from empire to abbey. The Roman concept of tempus fugit time flies resonated strongly in monastic thought, where time's fleeting nature underscored the urgency of prayer and salvation. This philosophical reflection imbued the measurement of time with moral and spiritual weight, reminding monks that every hour counted. It's a reminder that behind the technical systems lay profound human concerns about mortality, meaning, and eternity. You might wonder how Roman timekeeping survived through the chaotic early medieval period, often called the Dark Ages. The answer lies partly in the monasteries themselves, which acted as guardians of knowledge. Through the disciplined copying of texts and preservation of learning, monks maintained the transmission of Roman time concepts, bridging the classical world and the medieval future. This role elevated monasteries as centers not just of faith, but of culture and science. The Roman legacy also influenced emerging mechanical clocks centuries later. The desire to divide time into equal, measurable units echoes the classical quest for order. Monastic experiments with horologia and mechanical devices can be seen as extensions of this long tradition. So, when you hear the steady ticking of a modern clock, you're hearing echoes of ancient Rome filtered through centuries of monastic innovation. As you prepare to rest, consider that your own experience of time hours, minutes, seconds is part of a vast continuum stretching back millennia. The monks you've walked alongside tonight were custodians of a temporal heritage that intertwined empire, faith, science, and daily life. Their adjustments and adaptations remind us that timekeeping is as much cultural and spiritual as it is mechanical. So as your eyelids close and your breath slows, let the rhythm of centuries flow through you, the measured steps of monks following ancient patterns, the slow turn of sundials and water clocks, the enduring human desire to understand and honor the passage of time. In this shared history, you find a gentle connection to the past and to the timeless dance that carries us all. You step now into the curious, often overlooked realm of quirky time customs and peculiar rituals that colored medieval monastic life, with moments of levity and mystery. Beyond the strict schedules and measured hours, monks embraced a variety of odd practices tied to their understanding of time. reflecting a blend of superstition, tradition, and human nature's penchant for ritual. Imagine a monk pausing mid-prayer to perform a small gesture meant to ward off bad luck at the turning of an hour, or a group of novices exchanging whispered jokes about the lazy bell that always tolled late on Mondays. These customs, while seemingly trivial, offer a glimpse into the lived experience of monastic time far from rigid machinery. It was a tapestry woven with humor, hope, and sometimes baffling belief. One such quirky tradition involved the marking of time sins, moments when monks might inadvertently disrespect or disrupt the sacred flow of hours. For example, talking too loudly during prayer times, missing the bell, or hastening a meal were considered breaches that required mild penance or public acknowledgement. This attention to the small-time offenses reveals how deeply the monastery's rhythm permeated social life, setting expectations not just for punctuality, but for respectful participation in the communal temporal dance. You might picture a monk sheepishly confessing to a time sin during confession, prompting both seriousness and gentle amusement from his brethren. Another fascinating custom was the use of timekeepers' staffs, wooden rods marked with symbols or notches that campanari used to count bell tolls or measure intervals between prayers. These staffs were practical tools, but also carried symbolic weight, representing the monk's role as guardian of the community's temporal order. The sight of a campanarius methodically tapping his staff while ringing bells evokes a rhythmic ritual that anchored the monastery's flow. You might find it amusing to imagine monks competing to see who could ring the bells most accurately, or inventing mnemonic rhymes to remember complex bell sequences. Some monasteries developed playful superstitions around specific hours. For instance, the witching hour, often associated with midnight, was a time shrouded in mystery and caution. While monks typically spent this hour in vigil and prayer, stories circulated about spirits or omens tied to the darkest part of the night. Such beliefs added a layer of enchantment and solemnity to the nocturnal hours, reminding monks that time was not just measured, but also felt in the realm of the unseen. These narratives, mixing fear and faith, enlivened the monastery's nocturnal life and reflected medieval culture's rich tapestry of folklore. You may be surprised to learn about the laughing hour, a less solemn moment when monks were permitted brief respite through humor and storytelling. Though rare and often informal, these interludes acknowledged the need for human connection and relief within the strict temporal regimen. The balancing act between discipline and joy was delicate, but the existence of such customs shows that medieval timekeeping embraced the full spectrum of human experience. You might imagine the hushed chuckles in a shadowed corner, a gentle rebellion against the relentless ticking of hours. Oddly enough, some monks believed that certain days or hours were better for particular tasks based on astrological or spiritual qualities. For example, harvesting herbs at specific times was thought to enhance their potency, or copying sacred texts during particular hours was believed to imbue them with divine favor. These beliefs merged practical timekeeping with mystical significance, creating a lived experience where hours carried not just duration but meaning. Historians still debate how widespread and deeply held these customs were, but their presence adds color and complexity to monastic time. Practical jokes and gentle teasing also found their place in the monastery's temporal landscape. Novices were sometimes the targets of harmless tricks involving time, for instance, being told a prayer had already begun or that the bell would ring soon, prompting a scramble to comply. Such antics, while mild, helped relieve tension and fostered community bonds, showing that timekeeping was not only a matter of order, but also of shared humanity. You might smile imagining a novice dashing through cloisters, late but laughing. The blending of the sacred and the quirky extended to the physical spaces themselves. Some monasteries decorated their clocks, sundials, or bell towers with whimsical carvings or inscriptions, faces peering from stone, cryptic mottos about time's fleeting nature, or playful warnings against laziness. These artistic touches reflected monks' creativity and their desire to imbue temporal instruments with personality and moral lessons. The physicality of timekeeping was thus enlivened by humor and symbolism, making every glance at a sundial or bell a moment of reflection and delight. You also encounter curious rituals tied to the changing seasons and feast days, where time was marked by communal celebrations, fasting, or extended vigils. These occasions disrupted the daily schedule with special timings, reminding monks that time was flexible and sacred, punctuated by moments of joy, solemnity, and renewal. Such rhythms offered variety within the monastery's otherwise steady beat, highlighting the cyclical nature of monastic life. As your own thoughts begin to drift towards sleep, picture the monastery alive with these odd customs. A world where the measurement of time is infused with laughter, superstition, and ritual. This blend of order and whimsy invites you to reconsider time not just as a strict schedule, but as a living experience shaped by human spirit and imagination. So, as your breathing slows and your mind softens, carry with you the image of monks embracing the quirks and mysteries of their temporal world, a gentle reminder that time, even in its most disciplined forms, leaves room for joy, humor, and wonder. You now find yourself witnessing a fascinating truth, often overlooked in medieval monasteries, that monks were not merely passive keepers of time, but early scientists and innovators contributing actively to the understanding and measurement of time itself. These cloistered scholars, far from being secluded and disconnected, engage deeply with the natural world and emerging technologies, blending observation, experimentation, and spiritual inquiry. Imagine a quiet scriptorium bathed in candlelight, where a monk pores over celestial charts, compares sundial readings, or tinkers with a newly crafted water clock. This spirit of curiosity and practical problem-solving fueled advancements that paved the way for later developments in horology and astronomy. Historians continued to debate the extent of these scientific pursuits, but there's no doubt that monasteries were vibrant centers of knowledge and innovation. Monks' dedication to precise prayer schedules pushed them to refine timekeeping methods. They studied the sun's path meticulously, improving sundial designs to account for seasonal variations and geographic differences. Some experimented with water clocks, seeking ways to stabilize and prolong their flow. Their manuscripts include detailed notes and diagrams, early scientific records that reveal a systematic approach to understanding time. You might be surprised to learn that these scholars corresponded with other learned figures across Europe, exchanging knowledge and ideas. This network helped spread innovations and standardize certain timekeeping practices. Beyond practical devices, monks engaged in philosophical reflection on the nature of time itself. Drawing on classical texts and Christian theology, they grappled with concepts like eternity, temporality, and the soul's relation to time. These intellectual explorations enriched their scientific work, giving it a depth beyond mere mechanics. For them, measuring time was not just a technical challenge, but a spiritual quest to comprehend God's creation. This interplay between science and faith created a unique medieval approach that valued both empirical observation and metaphysical meaning. Some monks also contributed to the development of astronomical tables and calendars, refining the dating of liturgical events like Easter, which required precise calculations. These efforts demanded mathematical skill and careful observation of celestial cycles. The monastery thus became a laboratory for applied science. With timekeeping at its heart, you can almost hear the scribbling of quills as monks record the latest calculations or debate the best method to predict lunar phases. Interestingly, some monasteries hosted workshops where clockmakers and artisans collaborated with monks to build more reliable mechanical clocks. These collaborations reflect an early integration of craftsmanship and scholarship, blending spiritual dedication with technological innovation. Such partnerships help transition timekeeping from natural observation to mechanical precision, marking a significant shift in medieval society. Historians still study surviving records and artifacts to piece together how these collaborations functioned and their broader impact. You might chuckle at stories of monks inventing clever devices to improve timekeeping, for instance, mechanisms to automatically ring bells, or systems to track prayer sequences. These innovations were not always perfect. Some prototypes failed spectacularly, earning nicknames like the clanging contraption or the bell that wouldn't stop. Yet these trials and errors demonstrate a culture of experimentation and resilience, a testament to the monks' commitment to mastering time. The scientific spirit of monasteries also extended to natural philosophy and medicine, where understanding temporal cycles was crucial for treatments and healing rituals. Timing the administration of herbal remedies, fasting periods, and rest required accurate knowledge of daily and seasonal hours. This practical application linked timekeeping directly to health and well-being, reinforcing its importance in monastic and lay communities alike. This blend of science, spirituality, and daily life challenges modern stereotypes of medieval monks as solely pious and unscientific. Instead, it paints a picture of vibrant intellectual communities engaged in some of the earliest systematic studies of time. Their work laid important foundations for the Renaissance and beyond, influencing how time is measured, understood, and valued even today. As you drift further into sleep, imagine the flickering candlelight illuminating manuscripts filled with diagrams of gears, celestial charts, and philosophical musings on eternity. These are the legacies of monks who dared to explore time's mysteries, balancing faith and reason in equal measure. Their curiosity and innovation echo softly through the centuries, inviting you to consider your own relationship with time not just as a measured quantity, but as a profound dimension of existence. So, as your breath deepens and your mind quiets, carry with you the spirit of these early scientists, monks who turned contemplation into discovery, ritual into invention, and the passage of hours into a journey of understanding. In their quiet labs and cloisters, time was not just counted but honored, questioned, and, in its own way, loved. You step beyond the monastery's stone walls and into the surrounding villages, where the monks' approach to timekeeping quietly shaped the daily lives of entire communities. The monastery was not a closed world, but a temporal hub whose rhythms pulse beyond cloisters and chapels, weaving into the fabric of rural existence. Imagine a village square at dawn, where farmers pause in their morning tasks to hear the monastery's bell tolling the first canonical hour, or children adjusting their play as the midday bell signals time for rest and meals. The monks' measured hours, conveyed through bells, rituals, and local custom, became a communal heartbeat, synchronizing work, worship, and social life across the landscape. Historians still debate how extensively monastic timekeeping regulated laypeople's schedules, but its influence was undeniable, serving as a living link between sacred order and everyday reality. Villagers relied heavily on the monastery's bells to mark time, especially since few had personal timekeeping devices. The sound of bells traveling across fields and lanes was both practical and symbolic, guiding laborers in planting, harvesting, or market activities, and reminding them of spiritual duties. The monks' measured cadence introduced a structured temporality into the otherwise fluid rural world. You might imagine a farmer checking the sun, but ultimately trusting the monastery's bell to set the day's pace, blending natural observation with institutional regulation. This relationship fostered a shared sense of time rooted in community and tradition. Beyond auditory signals, monasteries occasionally provided sundials or public clocks in nearby villages, marking an early form of communal time infrastructure. These installations not only facilitated coordination, but also symbolized the monastery's authority and benevolence. The presence of such devices brought a touch of monastic order to village life, inviting laypeople into the rhythm of measured hours and canonical discipline. The spread of horological instruments beyond monastic precincts foreshadowed broader societal shifts towards standardized time. Monastic timekeeping also influenced local festivals, markets, and legal proceedings. The timing of markets often corresponded with prayer hours, balancing commerce with devotion. Justice was sometimes administered according to temporal cycles regulated by the monastery, underscoring the integration of sacred and civic order. You might picture villagers adjusting their plans around church bells, their lives a delicate choreography of work, worship, and social obligation. This temporal interconnectedness enhanced social cohesion, anchoring communities in shared rhythms. Interestingly, some monasteries extended their timekeeping influence through outreach, teaching laypeople how to read sundials or interpret bell patterns. This educational role helped disseminate temporal knowledge and fostered respect for the monastery's role as a timekeeper. Monks occasionally served as local timekeepers or mediators, resolving disputes related to work hours or festival dates. This blending of spiritual leadership and temporal governance reinforced the monastery's centrality in medieval life. The spread of mechanical clocks from monasteries to towns and cities accelerated the standardization of time. As public clocks became common, especially in market squares, they began to regulate urban life with greater precision. Yet the foundational rhythms established by monastic timekeeping persisted, echoing in the tolling of civic bells and the structuring of daily life. The monastery's temporal legacy thus extended well beyond its walls, shaping Europe's transition from agrarian rhythms to clock-driven modernity. You might smile, imagining the initial bewilderment and adjustment villagers experienced as fixed clock hours began to replace the variable monastic hours they had known. This transition was gradual and uneven, mixing old and new temporalities. Some resisted, preferring the natural flexibility of sun and bell, while others embraced the order and predictability of mechanical time. These tensions reflect broader cultural shifts in medieval society's relationship with time, authority, and change. As night falls on the village, the monastery's bells fade into the distance, marking the close of day and inviting rest. Their echoes carry centuries of tradition, innovation, and community woven together by shared timekeeping. For villagers and monks alike, time was not merely a measure, but a lived experience, a sacred framework binding the earthly and the divine. So, as you prepare to surrender to sleep's gentle embrace, imagine the monastery and village breathing together in measured harmony, a timeless dance of bells, work, prayer, and rest. In this shared rhythm, the past whispers softly, inviting you to find your own place within time's enduring flow. You now stand on the threshold of a revolutionary moment in timekeeping history, the gradual evolution toward mechanical clocks, a transformation that forever altered how humans perceived and structured their days. While medieval monasteries had long relied on sundials, bells, water clocks, and natural cues, the advent of mechanical clocks introduced unprecedented precision and regularity. Imagine a towering clock mechanism, hidden behind thick stone walls, its gears and weights methodically turning with a rhythmic inevitability that both fascinated and unsettled monks accustomed to the pliable flow of solar hours. These early clocks, often installed in bell towers, didn't display time with hands or numbers, but instead sounded bells at fixed intervals, calling monks to prayer with mechanical certainty. Historians debate the exact origins and diffusion of these devices, but it's clear that monasteries were among the first institutions to embrace and refine this technology, eager to tame time with engineering rather than nature alone. The mechanical clock represented more than technological progress. It symbolized a new worldview in which time was abstracted, measured uniformly, and controlled. Unlike variable hours that stretched or shrank with seasons, mechanical clocks divided the day into equal segments, introducing a fixed rhythm that reshaped monastic routines and, eventually, broader society. This shift challenged monks to adapt their practices, sometimes clashing with established traditions that valued temporal flexibility. You might imagine debates within cloister walls about the merits and risks of surrendering spiritual timekeeping to cold machinery, a dialogue echoing today's concerns about technology's impact on human experience. Early mechanical clocks were marvels of craftsmanship, but also marvelously imperfect. They required constant winding, delicate calibration, and frequent repairs. Some were prone to run fast or slow, and their sounds, deep chimes, and sharp tolls could startle monks used to softer auditory cues. Yet the promise of reliable, standardized timekeeping propelled their adoption. Monasteries invested in these devices not just for practical benefit, but as expressions of divine order made manifest through human ingenuity. You could picture a monk clockmaker, his hands stained with oil and soot, meticulously assembling gears while contemplating the profound responsibility of shaping time itself. The spread of mechanical clocks beyond monasteries into towns and cities transformed public life. Markets, courts, and workshops came to depend on fixed hours, coordinating complex social and economic activities. The church bells that once regulated rural life now competed with civic timekeepers, creating a layered temporal landscape. This transformation brought new challenges and tensions as communities negotiated the meanings and authority of time. Villagers and townsfolk adjusted from a solar and bell-based rhythm to one governed by mechanical regularity, a shift with profound cultural implications. You might find it amusing that early clocks had no faces, leaving people dependent on bell tolls or appointed timekeepers to interpret the hour. This reliance on sound reinforced the communal aspect of timekeeping, but also meant that personal punctuality remained elusive for some time. Stories survive of disputes over the exact moment a bell tolled or whether a clock was accurate. Illustrating the growing pains of this technological revolution, monks and laypeople alike had to learn new temporal literacies. Interestingly, some monasteries became centers of clock innovation, attracting skilled artisans and fostering experimentation. These environments blended spiritual discipline with scientific inquiry, producing advances in escapement mechanisms and gear design that laid groundwork for modern horology. The clock was not merely a device, but a symbol of human mastery over nature and time, an emblem of progress intertwined with faith. Yet, the mechanical clock also altered monks' experience of time, introducing a stricter, more linear progression that contrasted with the cyclical and contemplative temporalities of earlier practices. This shift influenced monastic spirituality, work habits, and even social relations, prompting some monks to lament the loss of temporal fluidity. The tension between old and new temporalities mirrors broader medieval transitions from medieval to early modern worlds. As you drift deeper into your own rest, imagine the slow turning of clock gears, the regular tolling of bells sounds that once marked a new era in time's unfolding. These mechanical rhythms echo through history, shaping how communities organize, how work and worship intertwine, and how humanity perceives its own fleeting existence. So, as your breath grows steady and your mind quiets, hold close the image of those first mechanical clocks, a testament to human creativity and the endless quest to measure, understand, and live within time's mysterious embrace. In their gears and chimes, the past and future meet, inviting you to join the timeless dance. You now enter the realm of scholarly debate surrounding the accuracy and impact of monastery clocks, a subject that has fascinated historians and horologists alike for centuries. Early mechanical clocks, though revolutionary, were far from perfect. They represented a radical leap from sundials and water clocks, but were often inconsistent, requiring frequent adjustment and maintenance. Imagine a towering clock mechanism high in a monastery bell tower, its gears grinding and turning with imperfect precision. The time it kept, sometimes minutes fast or slow. Monks depended on these devices to regulate prayer and work, yet they knew that no clock could capture the divine order perfectly. This inherent imperfection sparked ongoing discussions among medieval scholars about the reliability of clocks and the theological implications of trying to mechanize time. Historians still debate to what extent these early clocks truly improved timekeeping and how their limitations affected monastic life. One key point of contention revolves around how strictly monasteries adhered to mechanical time versus traditional methods. Some argue that early mechanical clocks were primarily ceremonial or auxiliary, used to ring bells at general intervals rather than dictate exact schedules. Others believe certain monasteries integrated these clocks fully into daily routines, embracing their precision despite faults. You might picture monks cross-referencing bell tolls with sundial readings or natural signs, aware of the clock's fallibility but valuing its consistency. This hybrid approach reveals the cautious optimism with which medieval communities adopted new technology, blending old wisdom with innovation. The debate extends to the accuracy of these clocks, as many early models lacked mechanisms to regulate speed precisely, resulting in variable timing, temperature fluctuations, wear, and imperfect craftsmanship all contributed to errors. Yet, even a rough approximation was a remarkable achievement, offering a fixed point of reference that sundials and water clocks struggled to provide. Some monasteries kept detailed records of clock performance, noting discrepancies and adjustments, demonstrating an early scientific approach to measurement. You might imagine a monk carefully observing the clock's behavior over weeks, seeking patterns and solutions to improve its reliability. Beyond technical concerns, the integration of mechanical clocks sparked theological and philosophical discussions about time's nature. Some monks worried that reducing sacred time to mechanical intervals risked losing its spiritual fluidity and mystery. Was time a divine gift to be experienced contemplatively, or a commodity to be precisely measured and controlled? This question remains central in debates about technology's role in human life. The clock symbolized humanity's attempt to master time, but also challenged traditional understandings of sacred temporality. Monastic chronicles reflect these tensions, revealing a nuanced negotiation between faith and progress. Historians also debate how widespread mechanical clocks were in monasteries during the Middle Ages. Early models were expensive and complex, limiting their distribution mainly to wealthy or influential institutions. Some suggest many monasteries continued relying primarily on traditional methods well into the later centuries. Others point to evidence of mechanical clocks in modest abbeys, indicating broader adoption than previously thought. This ongoing research sheds light on the diverse experiences of medieval monastic communities and their varying relationships with technology. You might find it fascinating that some clocks developed unique regional characteristics, influenced by local artisans and monastic customs. These variations affected how time was marked and experienced, adding cultural texture to what might otherwise seem a uniform technological advancement. The personalized nature of early clocks reminds us that technology is always embedded in social and historical contexts, shaped by human hands and minds. Despite imperfections, mechanical clocks profoundly impacted monastic discipline and medieval society. They facilitated more regular prayer schedules, enhanced coordination of communal activities, and contributed to the emerging concept of standardized time. This shift laid foundations for modern timekeeping and influenced social structures beyond religious settings. The debate about their accuracy and role underscores the complex interplay between innovation and tradition. As you relax deeper into sleep, imagine the ticking and chiming of these early clocks, reverberating through stone corridors, marking hours imperfectly but faithfully. Their steady, mechanical heartbeat contrasted with the natural rhythms of sun and star, offering a new temporal order that both challenged and enriched monastic life. The scholars' debates, like the clocks themselves, are part of a continuing conversation about how humans engage with time. So, as your breath slows and your thoughts soften, hold close the paradox of the medieval monastery clock, a symbol of human striving and limitation, precision and mystery. In its gears and sounds, you hear the echoes of centuries-old questions about time's measure and meaning, inviting you to ponder your own place within time's unfolding story. You now find yourself immersed in the profound relationship between time and spirituality that animated monastic life, where measured hours were not mere units but sacred vessels carrying the monk's devotion and reflection. For medieval monks, time was a divine gift, a framework through which they sought to order their souls and align their earthly existence with heavenly rhythms. Imagine the stone chapel bathed in candlelight as monks rise at prescribed hours to chant psalms, their voices weaving a tapestry of sound that transforms passing moments into acts of worship. The canonical hours, bell tolls, and sundial shadows were all reminders that every tick and toll was an opportunity for spiritual awakening. Historians emphasize that this spiritual dimension shaped not only how time was counted, but how it was felt and valued within the cloister. The cyclical pattern of prayer and work offered monks a way to sanctify the mundane, turning ordinary tasks into offerings to God. This intertwining of temporal structure and spiritual practice created a sacred rhythm, a continual dance of presence and purpose. Timekeeping was thus an act of faith, a discipline that nurtured humility, patience, and attentiveness. You might imagine a monk, rising before dawn, aware that each hour is both a fleeting moment and a chance to touch eternity. This duality infused monastic time with a depth often missing from secular schedules. Monastic theologians wrote extensively on the nature of time, grappling with paradoxes like eternity versus temporality and the soul's relation to God's timelessness. These reflections infused daily routines with meaning beyond the practical. The passing of hours was seen as a mirror of the soul's journey, both linear and cyclical, marked by repetition and renewal. You might find it fascinating how this philosophy shaped not only prayer, but attitudes toward aging, death, and salvation, making time a profound spiritual teacher. The monks' embrace of measured time also expressed a cosmic order, reflecting medieval beliefs that God created the universe with harmony and precision. The regular tolling of bells, the rising and setting of the sun, and the turning of the seasons symbolized divine order manifesting in the temporal world. This belief imbued the monastery's temporal framework with a sacred quality, turning timekeeping into a ritual that connected heaven and earth. You might picture the sunrise illuminating a cloister, each beam a visible sign of God's sustaining presence. There was also a contemplative dimension to monastic time, the space between activities, the pauses marked by silence and stillness. These moments were not empty, but filled with spiritual potential, allowing monks to reflect, meditate, and deepen their connection with God. Time was both a structure and a mystery, inviting ongoing exploration. This balance between discipline and contemplation remains a vital theme in spiritual traditions worldwide. Curiously, some monastic communities developed unique spiritual interpretations of particular hours or seasons, assigning special significance to times like midnight or the season of Lent. These associations shaped rituals and observances, enriching the spiritual texture of time. Historians still explore how widely these beliefs varied across regions and orders, but their presence highlights the diversity and depth of monastic temporal spirituality. You might be struck by the contrast between this sacred sense of time and the relentless efficiency prized in modern life. Medieval monks embraced time's slow unfolding, its cyclical nature, and its invitation to presence, offering a counterpoint to contemporary pressures to speed and control every moment. Their experience invites reflection on how time can be a source of grace rather than stress. As you drift towards sleep, imagine the monastery's quiet hours as a living prayer, the measured passage of time echoing through stone halls and silent gardens. Each hour, each breath, becomes a sacred thread weaving the fabric of a life devoted to the divine. This vision of time as sacred rhythm offers a gentle balm to the hurried pace of today. So, as your breath deepens and your mind softens, carry with you the monastic understanding of time not merely as measurement, but as a pathway to presence, patience, and peace. In this timeless dance, the past and present converge, inviting you to find stillness within the flow. You now settle into the quiet, contemplative space where time's silent passage became a profound teacher for medieval monks, an ever-present companion encouraging patience, humility, and acceptance. In the monastery, time was not merely a sequence of measured hours or tolling bells. It was a slow, unfolding mystery that invited monks to embrace waiting as a sacred practice. Picture a monk sitting alone in the cloister garden as the sun arcs slowly overhead, the shadow of a tree inching across the stone path, a gentle reminder that time moves steadily, without hurry or pause. This slow passage of time shaped a monastic mindset deeply attuned to endurance and presence, contrasting sharply with the hurried, fragmented experience of modern life. Historians note that this acceptance of time's slowness was both practical due to the limitations of medieval technology and profoundly spiritual, reflecting an ethos that honored the natural rhythm of existence. Waiting was not a passive state, but an active, disciplined engagement. Monks learned to inhabit the spaces between events, the silence after a bell, the pause before prayer, the moments when work ceased and reflection began. These intervals were opportunities to cultivate inner stillness and deepen one's connection with the divine. You might imagine the challenge of such patient waiting, especially during long night vigils or the slow seasons when daylight was scarce. Yet monks embraced these moments as essential, recognizing that spiritual growth often unfolds in the patient passing of time rather than in dramatic breakthroughs. The monastery's architecture itself reinforced this slow, attentive experience of time. The thick stone walls muffled external noise, creating a sanctuary of quietude where every sound, the rustling of robes, the drip of water, the distant bell was magnified in its significance. Gardens, cloisters, and chapels provided contemplative spaces designed for lingering, reflection, and mindful presence. You can almost feel the texture of worn stone beneath your fingertips, the cool air heavy with incense, the soft echo of footsteps marking time in a sacred dance. Monks also reflected on the paradox of time's seeming paradoxical nature, both fleeting and eternal. While hours passed unceasingly, they sought to glimpse eternity within each moment, transcending the temporal limitations of human life. This paradox infused monastic prayer and meditation, where time's passage was both a loss and a gift, a teacher of impermanence and hope. You might find it inspiring how these medieval contemplatives found profound meaning in time's silent flow, offering a counterpoint to the modern obsession with speed and control. Interestingly, monastic writings often describe time as a healer, a slow mender of wounds, and a clarifier of confusion. Patience cultivated through waiting enabled monks to endure hardship, navigate spiritual struggles, and cultivate wisdom. This understanding resonates today, reminding us that time's slow passage can nurture growth and resilience rather than mere aging or decline. The concept of kairos, or the opportune moment, also played a role in monastic temporal thought. While clock time measured chronos, the quantitative flow of hours, monks attuned themselves to kairos, the qualitative, spiritual moment ripe for prayer, insight, or transformation. This dual awareness enriched their relationship with time, balancing precision with openness. You might imagine monks pausing in prayer precisely because it was the right moment, a sacred threshold beyond mere minutes, the rhythm of monastic life. with its repetitive cycles of prayer and work, mirrored natural cycles of birth, death, and renewal. This cyclical understanding of time fostered a sense of continuity and hope, situating individual lives within a larger cosmic order. The passing seasons, the waxing and waning of light, and the steady toll of bells all reinforce this deep temporal awareness. You can picture a monk gazing at the dawn, sensing not just the start of a new day, but the unfolding of eternal cycles. As you nestle deeper into your own rest, imagine the slow, silent passage of time as a patient guide and ever-present teacher, inviting you to surrender to its flow rather than resist it. The monastery's embrace of waiting and presence offers a gentle invitation to let go of hurry and find peace in the moment's unfolding. So, as your breath steadies and your mind softens, carry with you the monastic wisdom of time's silent passage, a whispering companion reminding you that in patience, presence, and quiet endurance, we touch the eternal. You now stand at the threshold where the humble, measured methods of medieval monks gently echo into our modern world, a legacy of timekeeping that shaped not only monastic life, but the very way humanity understands and lives within time. The slow turning of sundials, the steady drip of water clocks, the rhythmic tolling of bells, and the first creaking gears of mechanical clocks were more than mere instruments. They were bridges connecting centuries of human experience, discipline, and devotion. Imagine those stone cloisters, now silent, yet still resonating with the faintest pulse of temporal order laid down so long ago, a pulse that continues beneath the digital hum of today's clocks and smartphones. Historians often reflect on how these early methods, while primitive by modern standards, established foundational concepts of measured shared and sacred time that endure. This legacy invites us to recognize that our relentless pursuit of precision and speed stands on the shoulders of patient monks who first sought to harmonize time with spirit and nature. Medieval monastic timekeeping was rooted in a profound respect for the natural rhythms of earth and sky. This connection to cycles, the rising and setting sun, the phases of the moon, the changing seasons reminds us that time is not merely a succession of moments, but a living, breathing reality woven into the fabric of existence. Their practices teach a vital lesson that time can be embraced as a flow to be honored, not a resource to be conquered. You might reflect on how modern life often divorces us from these rhythms, pressing us into rigid schedules and fragmented hours. Yet the monastic legacy persists as a quiet invitation to reconnect with time's deeper currents. The influence of monastic timekeeping extends into countless aspects of our contemporary world. The 24-hour day, the division of time into hours and minutes, the use of bells and chimes in public spaces all find roots in monastic tradition. Even the modern workplace's emphasis on punctuality and structured breaks can trace a lineage back to the monastery's disciplined cycles of prayer and labor. This continuity bridges the gap between ancient devotion and modern efficiency, revealing time as a cultural construct shaped over millennia. There's also a spiritual dimension that survives in subtle forms. Practices like mindfulness meditation, contemplative prayer, and the intentional use of pauses and rituals all echo monastic understandings of time as a sacred space. In a world racing toward instant gratification and constant connectivity, these echoes remind us of the value of presence, patience, and deliberate pacing. You might find comfort in knowing that the monk's careful cultivation of temporal awareness offers timeless wisdom, applicable even amidst our digital chaos. Moreover, the evolution from natural to mechanical timekeeping inaugurated by monks paved the way for the technological revolutions that transformed societies. The precision of clocks enabled industrialization, globalization, and the complex coordination of modern life. Yet, this advance carries paradoxes. The same time that allows great achievement can also foster stress and disconnection. Reflecting on monastic timekeeping encourages a balanced perspective, appreciating both the benefits and challenges of controlling time. You might find poetic justice in how these humble monks, living simple lives of prayer and work, influence the elaborate, high-tech time systems that define contemporary existence. Their legacy underscores that every innovation is rooted in human experience, faith, and a desire to order life meaningfully. In their quiet struggle to measure and honor time, they crafted tools and traditions that continued to shape our daily lives, often unnoticed but deeply felt. As night deepens and your own time of rest approaches, Imagine the monastery once more, its walls enfolding generations of monks who lived by the steady beat of sun, star, bell, and gear. Their lives were acts of devotion to time itself, a sacred rhythm sustained through centuries. This enduring pulse calls to you now, inviting you to slow down, breathe deeply, and enter your own harmonious dance with time. So, as your breathing grows soft and your mind settles into calm, carry with you the legacy of medieval timekeeping, a gentle whisper from the past reminding you that time, in all its forms, is a precious gift to be received with grace and presence. In this awareness, find peace, and let your journey into rest be as timeless as the monks' measured hours. The day's measured hours have passed, and now the monastery settles into a deep, gentle stillness, a quiet that wraps around stone walls and cloisters like a soft, comforting blanket. As your breath slows and the world grows hushed, you are invited to rest within this peaceful rhythm, where time no longer presses or demands, but simply flows like a slow, steady river. Imagine the fading glow of candles, the final toll of a distant bell, the cool night air carrying whispered prayers, and the scent of earth and incense. Here, in this calm, time becomes a quiet companion, not an urgent master. The monk's centuries-old dance with time reminds us that each moment is both fleeting and eternal, an opportunity to pause, reflect, and find grace. Their rhythms, shaped by sun, stars, bells, and gears, call us to embrace presence over haste, patience over frenzy. As your mind softens and your body sinks deeper into rest, feel yourself carried by this gentle tide of time, safe and steady. In this shared stillness, the past and present meet a timeless space where measured hours dissolve into the vastness of night and the promise of dawn. May this quiet legacy of monastic timekeeping guide you into dreams filled with peace, presence, and gentle light. Sleep well, and let time's soft whisper cradle you until morning.